Hi, friends. Welcome to Micro PD number one, kicking off the new school year. My name is Cris Tovani, and I am a secondary teacher in Colorado. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I've got just a few things that I want to share with you that I learned teaching high school kids, and that I share as an instructional coach, and also some ideas that are in my new book, Why Do I Have to Read This? So we're going to start off with a quote from one of my mentors, George Couros. And he says, for all students to excel, teachers must learn about them and connect with each child. This is not just about finding out how they learn, but it's about finding out who they are. And I love that quote. And when I was an elementary school teacher and I had 25 children all day long, this was really possible. But when I became a high school teacher and I had over 150 contacts, that idea of getting to know every single kid and connecting with him or her was really tough. And so I want to just edit this quote just a little tiny bit. I want to just add the word strive to. I want us to strive to learn about our students, that idea of figuring out something new about one or two kids every single day. So what we're going to learn about in this short micro PD are just some kind of quick ways that we can kick the school year off and get to know who our students are. So with that, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that our beliefs about what matters most drives our practices. And so I've got a couple questions here that I'd love for you to think about and maybe ponder. When we start next fall, it's going to be kind of crazy. I think there's going to be a lot of things that we haven't anticipated that are going to hit us, and we might have some blind spots. And so that idea of like figuring out what we believe matters most to teaching and learning is going to be really important, because if we can articulate that, that's going to help us sift and sort some of the things on our plate that maybe aren't as important as our core beliefs. Another thing I'd like you to think about is, how do your practices align with the beliefs you hold dear? One of the things that I know is that when our beliefs and our practices aren't aligned, it zaps teachers of energy. And so that idea of thinking about, okay, how does this practice that I'm doing reflect a belief that I hold dear about teaching and learning? So one of my core beliefs is example, and this, I'm going to share a couple examples, but this one, knowing my students well helps me to teach them better. So the practice behind that is I plan in ways that give me class time opportunities to know them. Sometimes people call this workshop model, sometimes they call it the student engagement model. But one of the things I don't want to do is lecture. If I lecture all period long, then I don't really know what kids are thinking. I don't get to know who they are as learners. And so I want to every day model something for them. I want to give them time to practice so I can confer. And while they're studying content, I can study them. And then I want to give them some time to do a little bit of reflection on how they're getting smarter. Another core belief that I hold dear is that students don't all read at the same grade level or speed. So I have to work to find a variety of text that represents different reading levels and text structures so that all kids can access the content. So when I plan units of study, I am trying to get away from just teaching a novel. I'm trying to teach an issue or a topic or something that kids can sink their teeth in. And I use the novel as an anchor text. So this particular example that's on the screen is for the book, The Things They Carried. Our unit of study was, what are we fighting for? And we were digging into our troops that were over in Afghanistan and Iraq, and trying to figure out, okay, why are we there? Should we be there? And so as we read this novel that was set during the Vietnam War, I want to have kids read historical text. I want them to read informational text. I want them to read commentaries, primary documents, photo essays. I want them to build their background knowledge about this time and also about war and the different perspectives on war, so they will have context for the plot and the setting of this book. But I know that not every kid is going to be able to read everything. So I want to be able to bring in choice so they can build their background knowledge, practice their reading and their comprehension and their vocabulary. And then we work together as we get through that anchor text, The Things They Carried. When I can articulate my beliefs, it helps me to kind of keep my practices in check. And so one of the things that I do the very first day of school is I share a letter with my students. And you've got a copy of this on page 2 of your handouts. And I want kids, I want to just give them a little bit of a heads up about who I am, what I believe, what matters most, what they're going to need to do to be successful in this class, how they need to kind of show up and participate. I think this does two things. One, it alleviates some stress, but I think the other thing that it does is it gives them a model. Whatever I ask kids to do, I try to do my own assignment, because my own assignment then helps me to figure out the roadblocks, but it also provides a model for kids. So when I was doing my own assignment and I was writing this letter, and I was thinking, okay, kids are going to read and annotate my letter, and we'll chat a little bit, then I'll have them write their own letter. And I started thinking, okay, if I were a kid, I would be wondering like what she wanted. Like this is so wide open. If somebody asked me to write them a letter about myself as a person, what would I put in that letter? So I began kind of just jotting some notes down of things that I was curious about, things that I wanted to know about the students that I was going to be teaching. And so on page 3 of your handout, you have an example of some of those questions. So I want to know what they like and dislike about reading and writing. And I want to know what's hard for them at school, but I also want to know what they do well and what they excel in. I don't make kids address each one of these bullet points, but I have this ready. So when a kid says, what am I supposed to write? When it's time for them to write their letter, I can say, oh, that's such a great question. Well, I want to know about you. If you're not sure where to start, here are some ideas that might help you get going. You don't have to stick with this, but this might just kind of wet your whistle a little bit and start your writing. My favorite question is this last one. Like, what would you hate for your last year's English teachers to know about you? And I just think I get so much interesting information from that. I mean, it's just really great what they'll tell you. And that question just kind of has, all these things bubble up from kids. That idea of like, okay, how do you want to get smarter during the first 2 weeks of school? That idea of beginning the new year with something fresh, and that idea that, we're going to work together to get smarter. I think that's also one that gives us a lot of information about teachers. Now, what's great about this first assignment is that not only do you get to learn about your kids, I don't grade it. I read each one. I write one comment to the kids so they know that I've read it. And then I kind of keep this checklist of what I'm figuring out about students. The wonderful thing about this as well is that it's a writing sample. So the very first week of school, you're getting a writing sample from students to kind of gauge, a little bit about them as writers. Another thing that I like to kick off the first week of school are these things called conversation calendars. So I mentioned earlier that I taught elementary school, and I did that for 10 years before going to high school. And I was teaching English classes, but then also some reading intervention classes. And I was trying to figure out read everything I could get my hands on about secondary literacy. And so a book that was really hot at that time was a book by a woman named Nancy Atwell called In the Middle. And so I was reading this book, and she had this great idea called back and forth journals. And so kids would write in these composition notebooks, and they would write letters to Nancy, and then she would write back to them every day. And I thought, okay, this is so cool. You're learning so much about your kids. So I tried to do that. And I was trying to do it with 135 kids, and it was killing me. I was, doing them at stoplights. I would take them to football games. It was just unmanageable. I couldn't do it. It was burning me out. And so I thought, okay, I got to find a simpler way. I like the concept, but I've got to find a tool that will make this manageable. What I learned later was Nancy Atwell wasn't doing this with 125 kids. She was doing it with more like 15. So that idea of these conversation calendars kind of bubbled up. And the idea is they write in the top part, and then I write back to them. And so this was Caleb's, and Caleb was a student I taught in a summer school class a couple of years ago. And the first couple of days of summer school, he did everything he could to get kicked out of class. He was just so naughty, and it was just like, oh, driving me crazy. So the very first day, I'm reading these calendars and writing back, and I get to Caleb's, and all he's written is his Instagram handle. And he told me I could share this with the whole world. He wants the whole world to go to his Instagram. So I got on there, and I looked at his pictures, and they were really good. Caleb in class presented himself as a class clown. He was fooling around. He would fake fall. He was doing everything he could to get attention. But when it came to photography, this kid was very serious. And it was an entry point for me to kind of connect with him to figure out, okay, what do you really care about? So I made a comment about the dog pictures that he took, and he had these kind of cool car photos that he took as well. So I write that. The next day he writes back, today was better. And so I wrote back to him, well, you did so much better. What made that day better for you? So I was trying to find out if he was metacognitive about his learning or what I was doing that was helping him. Third day, he writes, today was fun. Could use longer breaks though. So this was a 4-hour, 2-week class, and we had breaks in between. And so of course he would want more breaks. Then he stopped writing for the rest of the week. And so I can't remember why he did, but I wrote that on there. Now the idea isn't to penalize kids for not doing it. The idea is to give them a way to communicate. As an elementary school teacher, I got to see kids all day long, and I got to talk to them. I got to learn about them. I probably heard too much about their families. But with high school kids, those 49 minutes would go like this, and then the kids would leave. And so there'd be some kids I didn't touch base with for maybe 2 weeks at a time. The calendars were a way for me to say to a kid, I see you, I hear you. I'm so glad you're here. Help me get smarter about what you need. So like the letter, kids want to know what to write on these calendars. And so I say, you can ask a question. You can tell me something that you want me to know about you. If something we did in class that you didn't understand, you can ask me in the calendar. And I just pass these out at the beginning of the class period. And I don't give class time for them to write on these at all. They're due at the end of the period. There's just a tray by the door, and I just take them home. I, work on them in meetings, or, you can tell I'm not writing anything earth shattering. But the deal with this is I want to do it every class period, because if I don't, kids will burn out. I mean, kids won't care about as much. And so the burnout for us is pretty high if we try to do it with every student every day. So I really use these with my intervention classes. If you wanted to use them with every single one of your students, you might want to break it up into a 2-week cycle. So maybe the first week you do it with 3 classes, and then the second week you do it with 2 classes. Or maybe you just do it with your toughest class to try to get to know who they are. Now, as kids start to learn how to use these calendars, they really like them, but then you can also use them as a formative assessment tool. So here was one from Luis, and Luis was starting to write about himself he was trying to figure out about himself as a reader. So he writes in that first box, yes, I actually think I'm getting better at reading and faster. And the thing that I want you to help me with is to read boring stuff and not fall asleep when I read boring stuff. And so he was starting to figure out that during our silent reading time where I was conferring with kids, he would get sleepy. And one of the reasons he gets sleepy is because our eyes don't look at every single letter. They have these things called fixation points, and your muscles kind of move in this arc. And if you don't read very much, when you do start reading, those muscles are weak and you got to strengthen them. And so that was what was happening to Luis, but he was starting to be metacognitive about himself as a reader. Now you'll notice there's only a Tuesday, Thursday. This was a year we had gone to block schedule. And so in your packet, you've got a 5-day week, but I also put in if you have a AB block schedule. So this was later on in the quarter. And if you look at the very top part of Tuesday, there's some really dark marker there, and that was my comment. So I just took a blank calendar, I wrote this on, and then made copies for everybody, so I didn't have to write it on everybody's calendar. But I was trying to collect some formative assessment data. So here I wrote, I need some feedback. Tell me how you are liking the study of Romeo and Juliet. What are you wondering about? What is your opinion? And what modern day connections do you see? Feel free to go into my space. And so this is Collins, and Colin writes, he says, I'm liking the study of Romeo and Juliet. And I'm wondering, why did Romeo act so quickly when he killed Paris and himself? Why didn't he give himself time to feel bad? And if he did, she would have been awake and they wouldn't be dead. Modern day connections would be that people act quickly when they don't know what is going on. Like in lacrosse, you take a crazy shot when you're down by 1 with like 10 seconds left, and then you miss the shot and everyone is sad. I love this quote because it's just one of the things that one of our guiding questions or our provocative questions was, should every ninth grader read Romeo and Juliet? And so one of their summative assessments was to present to teachers in the English departments their position on should Romeo and Juliet be read by ninth graders or should it not? And so I wanted them to kind of look at the timelessness of Shakespeare. So I write back to him, your connection to today is so good. It's weird how well Shakespeare knew human nature. Romeo was so impulsive. He acted without thinking. I think it was his fatal flaw. Do you know what a fatal flaw is? So there's an opportunity for me to do a little bit of teaching there. He writes back, I think a fatal flaw means that when you act too quickly, it can be fatal. Shakespeare used human nature to his advantage because he knew what people wanted to see and also what people acted like when they were in love. He also was timeless with his work, and he tried to stay away from his day of age thinking. And so I love that kind of thinking about, okay, what was it like then? What's it like now? How can we connect? What you might have noticed on each one of these is the point. So this is the oldest calendar. And back in the day, before I knew better, I would use grading and points as coercion. So in these intervention classes, if you came to class and you didn't ditch and you showed up and you participated and you acted 80% civilized, I gave you 20 out of 20. It was a way for me to pad their points so they could be successful in a reading class where they hadn't necessarily been. Now, Colin was a very good reader. He was in a reading class because his previous year's English teacher didn't get to know him as a reader and a writer, and he was kind of naughty. He acted up, and she just assumed it was because he couldn't read well, and she was the one who added him. When you see Luis's, I knocked him back down to 10 points. And then with Caleb's, it was 0 points. I think what I ended up learning was that the payoff for kids to actually do the work is for me to actually write back to them. It's a way to emotionally engage them, to say to them, I see you, I hear you, I'm so glad you're here, I'm trying to learn about you as a learner and as a person. Conversation calendars are wonderful when it comes to classroom management. When I use these, my classroom management problems tend to decrease. And I think it's just because I get to know my students faster and quicker. Be careful about how many kids you give these to. So you just got to be strategic, because if you do, all of your students, you have 150 of them, you're going to burn out. And so what we can't manage, we tend not to keep doing. The last thing I want to just kind of leave you with is this idea of teacher being the connector in chief. And I had heard that, and I'm not quite sure where I did hear it, but I Googled it and there was an actual definition of it. A connector in chief is a leader who takes responsibility for being the catalyst for connections with, amongst, and between people on their team. And I think about us as teachers, and that's what we do. We're constantly trying to connect kids to our content. We're trying to connect them to the different texts that we bring in, to the right learning targets, to tasks that are worthy of their time. We want to connect them to the purpose and the need to know this information. We also try to connect them to models and modeling to show them what we want them to do. We also try to connect students together so they can learn from each other. And that idea of being a connector is such a great metaphor for starting off the year. How are we going to connect and learn from our students and with our students to help them be smarter and more empowered when they leave us? I want to thank you for your time today, and I appreciate you learning with me, and I look forward to sharing another micro PD with you. Thank you.